Emma had always been fascinated by the abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The stories of ghosts and strange occurrences had always intrigued her. She decided to explore the mansion with her friends one dark and stormy night. As they approached the mansion, they noticed that the front gate was slightly open. Emma's friends were hesitant, but Emma was determined to explore the mansion. She pushed the gate open and led the way into the overgrown garden. As they made their way to the mansion, the storm grew stronger. Lightning illuminated the sky, revealing the mansion's dilapidated state. The roof had gaping holes, and the windows were shattered. The wind howled through the empty halls, making the hairs on Emma's arms stand on end. As they entered the mansion, they noticed that the air was frigid. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards under their feet. Emma led the way up a staircase to the second floor. The darkness made it difficult to see, but they eventually found a room with a fireplace. As they huddled around the fire, they heard strange noises coming from the hallway. It sounded like footsteps and whispers. Emma tried to convince her friends that it was just the wind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Suddenly, the fireplace went out, plunging the room into darkness. Emma's friends screamed as they heard a sound of something moving closer to them. They tried to escape, but the doors and windows were jammed shut. Emma's heart raced as she felt something cold and clammy touch her shoulder. She turned around to see a ghostly figure standing behind her. It was the ghost of the mansion's former owner, who had been murdered in the very room they were in. The ghostly figure let out a blood-curdling scream, causing Emma and her friends to run for their lives. They eventually managed to escape the mansion, but they were forever haunted by the ghostly encounter. From that day on, Emma never ventured near the haunted mansion again. She learned that some stories are best left untold and some places are best left unexplored. Rachel had always been a successful businesswoman. She had a thriving career, a loving family, and a beautiful home. But one day, her life took a dark turn when she was cursed by a vengeful spirit. It all started with a visit to a remote village during a business trip. Rachel had inadvertently offended a local woman who was rumored to be a witch. The woman had cursed Rachel, warning her that she would never find happiness again. At first, Rachel dismissed the curse as superstition, but soon, she began to notice a string of unfortunate events. Her business deals started falling through, her marriage began to crumble, and her children became distant. Rachel began to feel like she was losing everything she had worked so hard for. As the years passed, Rachel's life continued to spiral out of control. She lost her job, her home, and her family. Everywhere she went, she felt like she was being followed by a dark presence. She couldn't escape the curse that had been placed on her. Desperate for answers, Rachel sought out a shaman who claimed to have the power to break the curse. But the shaman warned her that the curse was too powerful, and that breaking it would come at a great cost. Rachel didn't care. She was willing to do anything to break the curse and regain her life. The shaman performed a ritual that lasted 4 hours, but in the end, he declared that the curse had been broken. Rachel felt a surge of relief as she left the shaman's hut, but her relief was short-lived. As she walked back to her hotel, she felt a strange sensation in her body. Her limbs grew heavy, and her vision blurred. She collapsed on the ground, never to wake up again. The curse had been broken, but at the cost of Rachel's life. Her family mourned her death, and the village where the curse had been placed was forever marked by the tragedy. The moral of the story is that sometimes, the price of breaking a curse is too high to pay, and that some curses are best left alone. Mia had always been a restless sleeper. She often woke up in the middle of the night, feeling like she was being watched. But one night, she woke up to a terrifying sight. As Mia opened her eyes, she saw a dark figure standing at the foot of her bed. It was the shape of a man, but it was completely black and featureless. Mia tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure started to move towards her, its footsteps echoing through the room. Mia tried to run, but her body was paralyzed with fear. The figure loomed over her, and she could feel its cold breath on her face. Suddenly, the figure disappeared, leaving Mia alone in the darkness. She tried to convince herself that it was just a nightmare, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The next night, Mia saw the figure again. This time, it was standing outside her window, staring at her with empty eyes. Mia tried to look away, but she couldn't. The figure seemed to be drawing her towards it, with a force that she couldn't resist. Mia's mental health began to deteriorate as the figure continued to haunt her. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and stopped leaving her house. Her family tried to convince her to seek help, but she refused to leave the room. One night, Mia couldn't take it anymore. She had to confront the figure and find out what it wanted. She got out of bed, opened her window, and stepped out onto the ledge. The figure was waiting for her, and as she approached it, she saw a glint of recognition in its eyes. It was her father, who had died years ago in a car accident. Mia couldn't believe it. Why was her father haunting her? What did he want? The figure spoke to her, in a voice that was both familiar and unfamiliar. It told her that it was here to protect her, to keep her safe from the dangers of the world. Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her. Her father was still with her, even in death. But as she reached out to touch the figure, it disappeared, leaving Mia alone on the ledge. She felt a sudden gust of wind, and before she could react, she lost her balance and fell to her death. Mia's family was devastated by her death. They couldn't understand why she had taken her own life. But Mia knew the truth. The figure that had haunted her was her father's ghost, trying to protect her from the world. But in the end, his protection had led to her demise. The moral of the story is that sometimes, the things we fear the most are the things that we love the most. And that sometimes, even the love of a parent can be suffocating. Marie had always dreamed of becoming an actress. When she landed a lead role in a local theater production, she was over the moon with excitement. But little did she know that the theater was haunted by a phantom that was determined to stop a show. As rehearsals began, strange things started happening. Props would move on their own, and lights would flicker on and off. The cast and crew brushed it off as harmless pranks, but Marie couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at work. One night, as Marie was rehearsing her lines on stage, she saw a figure lurking in the shadows. She called out, but there was no response. When she went to investigate, she found that the figure had disappeared. As the opening night drew near, the strange occurrences became more frequent. The cast and crew were on edge, but they were determined to put on a good show. But on the night of the performance, things took a terrifying turn. As Marie was performing her big solo, she saw the phantom appear on stage. It was a ghastly figure, dressed in a tattered cloak and mask. Marie tried to continue with her performance, but the phantom began to taunt her, causing her to freeze on stage. The audience was stunned as they watched the drama unfold. But what they didn't know was that the phantom was not a prankster or a ghost, but a disgruntled former actor who had been fired from the theater years ago. He had been lurking in the shadows, determined to stop a show and get his revenge. In the chaos that ensued, Marie and the rest of the cast managed to escape the theater unscathed. But the phantom was never caught. From that day on, the theater was known as a haunted place, and nobody wanted to perform there again. Marie eventually gave up her dream of becoming an actress, unable to shake the trauma of that night. And the phantom continued to haunt the theater, forever seeking his revenge. John was a respected member of his small town. He was known for his kindness, his honesty, and his willingness to help others. But one day, John's life took a dark turn when he became a victim of a demonic possession. It all started with a strange dream. John dreamed that he was being visited by a dark entity that promised him power and control. When he woke up, he felt a strange energy coursing through his body, and he knew that something was wrong. At first, John tried to ignore the strange sensations, but as time went on, he began to experience violent mood swings and erratic behavior. He would scream and curse at his family, and he would lash out at his neighbors for no reason. The townspeople were shocked by John's sudden change in behavior. They didn't know what to make of the once honorable man who had become a monster. Some whispered that he was possessed by a demon, but most dismissed it as superstition. But as the days passed, John's behavior became increasingly bizarre. He would talk to himself in strange tongues, and he would perform bizarre rituals in his backyard. The townspeople grew more and more afraid of him, and they started to avoid him at all costs. One night, as John was performing one of his rituals, he summoned a demon that possessed him completely. The demon used John's body to wreak havoc on the town. He destroyed homes, attacked people, and caused chaos wherever he went. The townspeople were terrified, and they realized too late that John's possession was real. They tried to exorcise the demon from John's body, but it was too strong. In the end, they were forced to kill John to stop the demon's rampage. The town was forever changed by the events that transpired. They mourned the loss of John, the once honorable man who had become a victim of a demonic possession. And they realized that sometimes, evil can come from the most unexpected places. The moral of the story is that sometimes, even the most honorable people can fall victim to the forces of darkness, and that it's important to be vigilant against evil, even in our own communities. Leela was driving home from a friend's house late at night. She had been on the road for hours, and she was running low on gas. She saw an empty gas station up ahead and decided to stop and fill up. As she pulled into the gas station, she noticed that there were no other cars around. The place was deserted, and it gave her an eerie feeling. She tried to shake it off and focused on filling up her tank. But as she was pumping gas, she heard strange noises coming from the gas station building. She thought she heard footsteps and whispers, but when she looked around, there was nobody there. Leela was starting to feel nervous, but she told herself that she was being paranoid. She finished filling up her tank and got back into a car. But as she was about to pull away, she saw a figure in a rearview mirror. It was a man, dressed in all black, with a hood over his head. He was standing by the gas station building, watching her. Leela was terrified, but she tried to remain calm. She drove away as quickly as she could, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the man was following her. As she drove down the dark, deserted road, she saw the man's figure in a rearview mirror again. He was following her, and she could see the glint of a knife in his hand. Leela sped up, trying to outrun the man, but he kept getting closer. She was about to give up hope when she saw a police car up ahead. She honked her horn and pulled over, and the man disappeared into the darkness. The police officer approached her car and asked her what was wrong. Leela told him everything that had happened, and the officer told her that she was lucky to be alive. He explained that the gas station was known for being a hut for criminals and that she should never have stopped there at midnight. From that day on, Leela never forgot the terrifying experience she had at the gas station, and she made sure to always fill up her gas tank before it got too low, so she would never have to stop at a deserted gas station again. The moral of the story is that sometimes, it's best to trust your instincts and avoid dangerous situations, even if it means taking a detour or going out of your way. Avery had just moved into her new apartment, and she was excited to start this new chapter of her life. But when she met her male roommate, Jake, she got an uneasy feeling. Jake was tall and thin, with deep-set eyes and a strange way of speaking. Avery tried to brush off the unease and settled into her new room, hoping that things would get better. But things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse. Jake would always come into her room without knocking, and he would make inappropriate comments about her appearance. Avery felt uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to confront him. One night, Avery woke up to a strange sound. She heard someone moving around in her room. She sat up, but the room was dark, and she couldn't see anything. She heard a strange breathing sound, and she realized that someone was standing right next to her bed. Avery was too terrified to move. She didn't know what to do. But then, she heard Jake's voice. "Hey, Avery," he said. "I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd come in here and talk to you." Avery was angry and scared at the same time. She told Jake to leave, but he just laughed and said that he wasn't going anywhere. That was the final straw for Avery. She knew she had to get out of there. She packed her bags and left the apartment the next day, never looking back. Years later, Avery heard that Jake had been arrested for a series of brutal murders. She shuddered, thinking about what might have happened to her if she had stayed in that apartment with him. The moral of the story is that it's important to trust your instincts and take action when you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. Don't stay in a situation that doesn't feel right, even if it means leaving behind something that you had been looking forward to. David had been an Uber driver for a few months now. He enjoyed the job, and the extra cash was always helpful. But one night, he picked up a passenger that would change his life forever. It was a late-night ride, and David was feeling a bit tired. He picked up the passenger, a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s, and started driving towards her destination. The woman was quiet, and David didn't think much of it. But then, they turned onto a dark and deserted road. The streetlights were dim, and the trees seemed to loom ominously over the road. David began to feel uneasy. As they continued down the road, the woman suddenly spoke up. "Can you stop the car, please?" she asked. David pulled over, and the woman got out of the car. She walked to the trunk and opened it up. David was confused. He didn't know what she was doing. Then, he saw the body in the trunk. David was paralyzed with fear. He couldn't move or speak. The woman turned around and looked at him with a sinister smile. "I'm sorry, David," she said. "You've been a great driver, but I can't have any witnesses." David tried to run, but the woman was too fast. She caught up to him and plunged a knife into his stomach. David fell to the ground, bleeding and gasping for air. The woman got back into the car and drove away, leaving David to die on the side of the road. The moral of the story is to always be cautious when driving for ride-sharing services, and to trust your instincts if a situation feels unsafe or uncomfortable. You never know who your passengers might really be, and it's important to stay alert and aware at all times. John woke up to find himself lying on the ground in the middle of a dense forest. He had no idea how he ended up there or why he was there. John tried to remember what had happened, but his memory was blank. He didn't even know his name or where he was from. He looked around, but the forest seemed endless. He didn't recognize anything. John tried to stand up, but he was too weak. He had no food or water and was completely disoriented. Panic set in as he realized he was lost and alone. As night began to fall, John stumbled upon a small clearing in the forest. There was a small fire burning in the middle of the clearing, and a figure sitting beside it. "Who are you?" John asked, but the figure didn't respond. John walked closer, and as he got closer, he saw that the figure was a skeleton. He tried to run away, but the skeleton started to move. It stood up and started to chase him. John ran as fast as he could, but the skeleton was relentless. It chased him through the forest, always just out of sight but never far behind. John could feel its bony fingers reaching out to grab him. As the night wore on, John grew more and more tired. He knew he couldn't keep running forever. Finally, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The skeleton loomed over him, its bony hand reaching out to grab him. John closed his eyes and waited for the end. But when he opened his eyes again, he was back in his own bed. It had all been a nightmare. The moral of the story is that sometimes our fears and anxieties can manifest themselves in our dreams, and it's important to confront and overcome them. It's also important to always be aware of our surroundings and to never let our guard down, even in our own dreams. Emily had always been plagued by nightmares, but one in particular stuck with her. In the dream, she was trapped in a dark and twisted forest, with no way out. As she wandered through the forest, she came across a strange figure. It was a man, but his face was twisted and deformed, and his eyes glowed red in the darkness. The man started to chase her, his twisted limbs moving in unnatural ways. Emily tried to run, but she felt like she was moving through molasses. She was trapped, with no way out. Just as the man was about to grab her, Emily woke up, drenched in sweat. She was relieved to find that it was just a nightmare, but something about the dream stayed with her. Over the next few days, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every time she turned around, she felt like the strange man from her dream was there, lurking in the shadows. One night, Emily woke up to find the man from her nightmare standing at the foot of her bed. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man reached out and touched her forehead, and suddenly everything went black. When Emily woke up again, she was back in the dark forest from her dream. But this time, it was different. The trees were twisted and blackened, and the air was thick with a putrid smell. The man was there again, but this time he was different too. His twisted features were even more pronounced, and his eyes glowed brighter than ever before. He started to chase Emily again, his limbs moving in unnatural ways. But this time, she was able to run faster than before. She could feel the man's hot breath on her neck, but she didn't look back. She just ran. Finally, Emily burst through the trees and into a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a small cottage. Emily ran to the cottage and banged on the door, screaming for help. The door opened, and an old woman appeared. "What are you doing here?" the woman asked. Emily tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she just said, "I don't know. I don't know how I got here." The old woman nodded. "You're in the spirit world now," she said. "You're lucky to have made it this far." Emily didn't understand what the old woman meant, but she was grateful for her help. The old woman gave Emily some food and water, and showed her a place to rest. When Emily woke up again, she was back in her own bed. She never had a nightmare again, but she always wondered what had happened to her in the spirit world.